Hi everybody, this is pianist Mackenzie Melemed. Welcome back to another Pianostics video. For those of you joining in for the first time, a big welcome to you. I'm a 29-year-old classical pianist. I did my training at the Juilliard School in New York City with Robert McDonald and Emmanuel Axe, and I've been teaching privately since graduating in 2020. I currently reside in Helsinki, Finland, and I recently had the idea of promoting education for classical piano, especially trying to share some of the knowledge that I've gained. It's invaluable information from fantastic teachers while studying at Juilliard. I would really appreciate it if you like the videos and subscribe to the channel, and also share with your classical piano communities as well. These 15-minute lessons, my first series, they're going to cover a wide variety of different repertoire from Bach to Chopin. We'll be discussing elements of like fingering, phrasing, articulation, how to think about the overall architecture of the piece, and hopefully there'll be something in every episode that you can apply to your own practicing to help make it more efficient, practicing smarter so you can learn more in less time, and also get right to focusing on the musical content in the score. I really appreciate you being here with me, and without further ado, let's jump into the lessons. In today's lesson, we'll be speaking about phrasing, and as an example of a short piece we could use to discuss phrasing, we'll be looking at the fourth miniature called The Pleading Child from Robert Schumann's set Kinderszenen, Scenes from Childhood, Op.15. Scenes from Childhood was one of the first pieces I ever started to work on, and I remember Alfred Cortot, there's a performance and a snippet of his playing number 13, The Poet Speaks, from a DVD or a CD that I used to watch with my parents called Pianists, Great Pianists of the 20th Century. And, hearing Horowitz and his fantastic recordings of this piece, it was just one of the first pieces that I learned to obviously improve my technique, as there aren't really too many technical difficulties in this set of pieces, but the musical landscapes that he gives us in short 1-2 page miniatures is really boundless, and there are so many opportunities to look at voicing and phrasing and everything to make a new performance, a new interpretation of this piece every time we approach the piano to give a performance of it. So in my game plan today, in basically talking about the phrasing and crafting a coherent, or many different kinds of coherent performances of a small work with a lot of repetitions, I have 4 points in our game plan. The first point is map the phrases and spot the double bar lines. So first we'll just look very simply at, it's just one page. We have 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 16, 17 measures in this work. And so we don't have a lot of time to make a huge, climb up the mountain and back, but we definitely have time to make a story and one that is succinct, but also takes us somewhere and back. It doesn't have to be climbing Mount Everest. So let's see. Got our first theme idea here. Turn up the volume a little bit. Then we have it repeated a second time in pianissimo. So then we've got these double bars here, double lines. They're not the really bold double lines, but it's a way, I think, in this work for Schumann to let us know that this is the end of the first phrase. We're going to start our second phrase. And the pattern of this work is that everything gets repeated, and he would like us to play it again with little variation, a little bit quieter. So going from piano to pianissimo. And again, he gives us this double bar. So I'm going to change to a different color here, to our third idea. And And this is slightly different because it's leading back to the first theme, but we also have ritardando, which lasts this whole section. So that's going to be important later. That's kind of the place where we get to do the most, I would say, in terms of our musical language and the path that we go on. But actually, we end up going back to the first theme as a kind of recap. There. So we've got our three main ideas, A, B, C, back to A. And each idea is repeated twice, which gives us time to think about our phrasing and think about, as we go from one section to another, are we connecting them? Are we having kind of a hard stop? What are we doing with the dynamics? And that's the second idea in my game plan, is addressing the dynamics where we only have two different dynamic values marked, piano and pianissimo. We don't have crescendos except we have two hairpins. We've got a hairpin here, we've got a hairpin here. Other than that, it's piano and pianissimo, and the only other markings we have is ritardando and a tempo, so getting a little bit slower. But there's nothing that allows us to, as we're going through the phrase, to either peter out into a very soft dynamic, but he really just gives us one and then the other, one and then the other. So the shifts are, in essence, they look on paper a little dramatic, but we'll discuss and see what actually makes sense given the title of the work and the piece as a whole, where we think it's going. So let's look at the third idea on the game plan. Exhaust all possible voicings and pick the most suitable. So before we think about the dynamics and make our decisions, we're also going to look at the voicings and see if that also affects how we're going to move from phrase to phrase. So obviously we're opening up, and the typical main phrase is going to be the one which is, at the top in the soprano line. So we'll think about this voicing. So this is written legato, even though we've got a lot of things to do. I don't use the same fingering as what is in this score, but there is some consensus that this legato line with slurs, the topmost line that we play with our pinky mostly, is not something that we can play very, very easily legato, because we have to be changing and also hitting this alto line as well. So we're going to be using 5 and 5, and then 4 to 5 if you want, and then 4 to 5, and then 4 and 5. So it's not something that is, we can't use all of our fingers like 1, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 2. That would make it easier to play the legato, but we have more notes to play than that. So we also have to think then, how are we going to keep the legato, even though we're kind of adjusting our hand and moving from note to note? So that's where the voicing comes in. Even when we start playing, we've got our left hand and then we have this intermediate voice. And then we have our upper voice. And the way that we keep it legato is that we stay really true to the voicings, and we make sure that if we are really hearing this phrase through, that we're keeping our hands really balanced, and we're keeping the movements, we're keeping our movements to a minimum so that we can maintain the right sound quality that we have chosen from the beginning. If we're suddenly, adjusting and not really caring about the overall line, we're not going to have a line that the sound pulls through and we really feel like it could be played with all of our fingers as a very confident line. But since we have to use our outermost fingers to create the idea that we're really being close to the notes, we need to keep the sound production even to allow for that illusion. Which is much different than for one, we don't need to be hearing that syncopation all the time, and that's going to take away from hearing our upper line. Also, we don't need to adjust our hands after every eighth note because that's going to give us a good sound quality perhaps, but it's not going to have the kind of connection that we need between each note. And that sounds like we're resetting the note so that we don't really follow through. Then here's another voicing. I'm going to take the bottom line. I'm going to still use the bottom line, and I'm going to take the last 16th here that I'm playing with my left hand, and I'm going to make that part of the line. Another idea is da-da-dum, ba-da-dum, ba-da-dum, bum. Another idea is we can do ba-dum, 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 bum. So in these cases, no matter how many times you play it through, we have a couple of opportunities to play each line. And for the first motif that we have in blue, we actually have 3 and 4 times to play the same phrase. And of course, if we were thinking, Mom, can I have this? Mom, can I please have this? Well, Mom, you said you would buy this for me. There are many ways for a child as well to express that character of you're pleading for something that you really want. And a child will use all sorts of different tactics as well. You said I could get this last week, or you promised me this, or I would really behave myself well. And all of those characters and moods and urgencies, the child is really trying. Even though we've got piano and pianissimo, there are ways to incorporate those characters and those feelings into this short character work. I think in our kind of burgundy red section where we have a ritardando, and perhaps the child is kind of resigning himself or herself to the fact that, well, maybe I'm not getting what I asked for. And this is maybe the part where the child actually raises his or her voice. It's the only place we see a hairpin, going. And maybe when they're rejected, it's a little quieter of a whimper. And what I love here is that the end of the first section, we've got a double bar line. End of the second section, double bar line. End of the third section, no double bar line. And that's something that's really nice that you can also consider in between the second and third measures of each of your sections, is that just because we see there's one, 2-measure phrase with a slur, another 2-measure phrase with a slur and a break, and a two-measure phrase with a slur, we don't always have to reset after each slur. And it may be helpful to kind of lead ourselves into the next phrase. Definitely I would do it going into the recap where we don't have the double bar, because I think it just gives us that little bit of spontaneity, whereas my number 4, I have, keep it spontaneous. We don't want to be following, these big blocks and not really going anywhere with them. Even if they're very well maintained and well polished and have beautiful voicings, it's tough that we, go through the first melody, what happened in that space? It sounds a little prefabricated. Whereas if we have, an idea, the child is not giving up. Maybe this is the big attempt. So I try to connect this third section with the recap a little bit. And when we have our final line, a tempo, we see that the ritardando is going to happen in the third to last measure. So I think that what I was just saying to avoid, we have 2 measures and the slur ends. There's no reason to stop here because he already gives us a natural stopping point, having written ritardando coming into a fermata. And so this is a really great exercise for examining on a micro level all of the things you can do, the voices that you can bring out, and sustaining these long lines, even having to use your pinky for most of the lines, but focusing on minimal movement of your hand and adjusting frequently so that you can maintain a consistent sound quality, so that your right hand and your pinky and that main melody line can continue to soar over the accompanimental lines if that's the voicing you want to go through with. And you also keep it within, a general piano or general pianissimo. And that can just give so much of, many, many more dimensions to the work with all of its nuances and just, as we said, 17 measures. So let me know what you think about this little lesson on phrasing with some beautiful Schumann.